Thank you, Bob. We have not called, by the way, the race for Speaker Gingrich. He's being challenged by the millionaire cookie manufacturer, baker, Michael Coles. We have the raw data in so far with 13% of the precincts reporting. You see the Speaker with just about 5,000 ahead of Mr. Cole. CNN's live coverage on this election 96 from CNN Center here in the atrium in Atlanta will continue in just a moment. We have been reporting to you very faithfully every late-breaking development. We have another one. This one concerns the Dole camp. Please listen very carefully. The Dole camp is now saying that a statement released from the Dole camp was released prematurely. The Dole camp emphasizes at this hour no concession has been made, nothing has been conceded, and the Dole camp regrets any confusion the prior release of that statement might have caused. And important to remember, Dole campaigned very vigorously in California. He drew a bullseye around that state, and obviously the man does not want to concede anything unless and until the polls close in California, and those polls are open for 45 more minutes. We'll keep you updated on that. Judy?
All right, let's take a look now at a state we reported the Senate results on just moments ago. That is Massachusetts. We declared John Kerry the winner. 594,000 votes at 52%. Let's go to Governor Weld, who is making a speech right now. Let's listen.
Buckingham. She is a brilliant general who managed to wage war and command an army and keep an unruly candidate in line without ever losing her sweetness of temper. And if that ain't a high wire act, I don't know what is. And as well, Tom Valley, who ran the most efficient, disciplined, high-spirited operation I've ever seen in a campaign. Or anywhere else, for that matter. Valley, you're number one. And Martha Chayette and her crew on the finance operation. They took us from zero to financial security in 11 months on Martha's first try, with no practice. Think what that woman can do with practice. It's scary. And I do want to thank, and I want to individually congratulate all the rest of the best campaign staff and interns and volunteers in the country. It's been an unbelievable operation, and I will never cease to be grateful to all of you. I'm grateful to the chairman of my campaign, State Senator Brian Lees, for rousing Western Massachusetts on my behalf, and for endless good advice. But
Massachusetts Governor William Weld will be remaining as the governor of Massachusetts. He lost a bid to become that state's junior U.S. senator. This is someone who took a great big gamble, Bernie, when he decided to stick his neck out and say to the voters, please elect me to the U.S. Senate. He already had a pretty good job as governor. He'll continue in that job. He
told the audience there tonight in Boston he was awaiting the hit and vote. The hit and vote never appeared, and Bill Schneid had reported in exit polling that there was a wide gender gap. Women breaking overwhelmingly for his opponent, John Kerry, the incumbent Democrat, as opposed to Governor Weld. That's one situation in the Northeast. In the South, in Little Rock, everybody's happy down there. Let's see the smile on the face of Leon Panetta, the White House Chief of Staff.
Yes, it's there.
There it is.
Tell us about your reaction, Leon Panetta, and especially that of the president.
Well, everyone is obviously very pleased with the predictions, but I think you're right to continue to say to the voters in my home state of California, get out there and vote because you can still make a difference. But we're obviously very pleased with the course that this election is taking tonight. We feel very comfortable and very good and very excited.
Leon Panetta, let's talk hard-nosed strategy for a moment. I know you're in a crowded, noisy area there, but please, let's go back to 1994 when your boss, the president, was devastated by the Republicans riding roughshod into Washington and taking over the Congress. That affected him mightily. He began the tack towards the middle when he saw what happened. The Republicans shut down Congress, and a lot of people believe that that was the turning point and the launching pad for the Clinton re-election victory tonight.
Bernie, I think, as always, these things go to a lot of important factors. I think, first of all, I think the president's record, and that goes back to his first 2 years, particularly on the budget, reducing the deficit and getting the economy in place, along with crime and education. All of those elements were put in place the first 2 years. But obviously, when the Republicans came in and shut down the government, the American people then could contrast what he had done and tried to do for the country with where they were trying to take the country. And I think that helped a great deal in terms of getting the president's message across to the American people about the future.
We don't know yet, Leon Panetta, what the final vote total will be, but as of now, it's looking as if the president is under 50%. Does it make a difference that this president might be coming back to office with a less than a majority support of the American people?
I think we're headed towards a clear victory for the president. He'll be the only, I guess about the 5th Democratic president in our history to win re-election to the presidency. He's the first president since President Roosevelt, Democratic president, to win re-election, and it looks like we're headed to about 400 electoral votes. So I think he's got a very strong victory to bring to the country and to the Congress in terms of getting his agenda accomplished.
Well, Leon Panetta, no one is denying the victory tonight and denying the congratulatory atmosphere, but going back to the tone of Judy's question, it looks like President Clinton, re-elected, first time for Democrats since FDR in the 40s, it looks like the president is going to have to deal with a plurality rather than a majority of the vote. As we're looking on screen now at 35%, it shows the president at 50% right now. That's with 35% of all precincts nationwide reporting. But my question goes to the tone of the Congress. It might be predominantly Republican, we have to wait and see, but the tone of the Congress this president will have to deal with. And my question is, when does lame duck disease set in?
Well, I'll have to tell you, having worked for this president, there's no such thing as lame duck disease for him. He's intent on a strong agenda for these next 4 years. He's talked about education. He's talked about balancing the budget. He's talked about implementing health care provisions for kids. He's talked about doing a lot of things in terms of crime, particularly with regards to gangs, youth gangs, and neighborhoods. He's got a very clear agenda, and I think right now, if the Republicans are smart and the Democrats are smart, there'll be a bipartisan effort to implement that agenda. The American people, frankly, are sick of gridlock and partisanship and the kind of political attacks and personal attacks that we've seen. That's reflected in this vote tonight.
Well, speaking of political and personal attacks, Leon Panetta, last question. The president has been relentlessly attacked in these last days and weeks by Bob Dole and Ross Perot on ethics charges, on character, on trust, on honesty. Did your campaign, did the White House underestimate the extent to which this was going to dominate this campaign?
Well, I have to tell you that I think looking back over these last 4 years, it's pretty clear that a number of efforts were made through allegations to go after personal attacks in one way or another. So we anticipated, unfortunately, I think for the American people, that this campaign was going to be about insults rather than issues. That was too bad. But they were smart enough to focus on the issues. That's why they voted the way they did. And I think that's a signal to the Republicans and to the Democrats and to the American people that what the Congress and the President need to focus on are the issues that affect families in this country. If it bogs down in personal attacks or allegations and investigations, I think the American people are going to say, reject that and say it's time to get down to business and deal with us, not yourselves.
Leon Panetta, White House Chief of Staff, and we should tell you as you leave us
they're
that,
rocking here, Bernie.
they're rocking there, but the man you drew a bullseye around, House Speaker Newt Gingrich of Georgia, guess what? He's coming back to Washington. CNN declares Gingrich the winner over his challenging Democratic opponent, the millionaire cookie baker, Michael Coles. Newt Gingrich going back to Washington. CNN declares he has won in his congressional district. In New Jersey, Robert Torricelli, the Democrat who battled a Republican congressman for the vacant seat of Bill Bradley, is talking to his supporters. Let's listen.
These 6 years are clear. To be worthy of every ounce of your energy, all the devotion you gave to this campaign, all the service you gave to me. Thank you all so very, very much. Earlier I received a call from Dick Zimmer. No, there's been enough of that. I congratulated on his drive, his tenacity, and the spirit with which he defended his own beliefs. Now to the people of New Jersey on these last moments of the 1996 campaign. I want to make a suggestion of my own. There is a place in public life for spirited debate. Differences of ideas and positions on issues is what governing our country is all about. But there is nothing contradictory in the conflict with ideas, in being civil to each other, respecting each other's views.
One happy headquarters, one happy candidate, now Senator-elect Bob Torricelli in New Jersey, telling everybody how glad he is to be in that position. We hope we're going to be able to bring you a number of campaign headquarters. In fact, we were just about to hear from North Carolina. We're going to try to do that in a minute, among other things.
And we'll be right back with more of our coverage, including Ken Bodie and Bill Schneider's just itching to give us the latest exit polls.
You guys are still here.
Bodie and the Cody.